After seeing my previous rant, a lot of people have asked me to talk about Metroid Other M in the same fashion. Now, I don't intend for all of these rants to become a how to fix series, but I will admit, there's a lot of things I can say about Other M in the same manner as I did the previous rant. I mean, in the same vein as Sonic 2006, Other M had a ton of great ideas that were implemented poorly, although for me it was less from a story standpoint and more from a gameplay standpoint. There's plenty I can say about this game, so much in fact I've decided to bring in another person who has just as much to say, TheAutarch.
Okay, here's the thing with me and Other M. Playing it the first time, I was actually kind of into it. I was sucked into the action and the flashy visuals, especially with the boss fights, and for me at the time, that was all I needed. Growing up and trying to defend the game as a mature story and even as an installment of the Metroid series, though, eventually my opinions on the game soured when I found myself unable to rationalize how the game fit into the series, both in terms of the universe the series established and what the games stand for. There are a ton of things people have taken issue with in Other M, as going anywhere on the internet will show you. But even after reflecting on my time playing this game, I still think there's some good that could have been salvaged with it. So here are the ways that we plan on fixing Metroid Other M. Number 1. Combat. Now, I'm a fan of fast and flashy combat. Metroid Other M has a very simple system, but its implementation of dodge rolling and some surprisingly acrobatic finishers makes it gorgeous to watch and truly cinematic. The combat is pretty dissonant from most of the other Metroid games, which focused more on environmental storytelling, but I guess it augments the Chozo lore a bit better, which fits into the game's over, to say the least, tie-ins to previous games in the series. We see the Metroid lore talking about how the Chozo training boosted Samus's abilities to make her a quote-unquote super athlete, but we never really see that explored outside of doing a few flips, which can be more attributed to her gear rather than her natural abilities. Here, Samus is running up frozen tentacles, getting launched into the air, and then performing pitch-perfect landings on giant bosses. I seriously want to fight Quadraxis from Prime 2 with this control scheme and see what other kinds of over-the-top shit they'll throw at me.
I'm all for cranking the lore up to 11, but several decisions rendered the flashy combat nearly moot. Switching from third person to first person did not help me with my immersion at all. In fact, I dropped the controller a few times, or the awkwardness of the movement made me miss my shot, get killed, or both. Another choice that puzzled me was having the 3D movement be controlled with a D-pad. Here's a question I want to ask the developers. Why didn't they include the nunchuck? For one, we could have had a more seamless transition between first person and third person via a simple button press rather than a gimmicky and clumsy motion control implementation. 2, third person navigation would have been much easier. 3, we could have used an aimer on screen in third person for you to pick which targets you wanted to fire at. 4, we could have had a far deeper system with the third person and first person modes, which brings us to... Number 2, expand upon the dual viewing modes. For all of its problems, the idea of having multiple viewing modes in Other M is an interesting addition to the series. We can see what they were going for, and it potentially expands upon what originally made Metroid Prime's viewing mode work. Notice that in third person mode, Samus is far more action oriented, while at the first person mode was more about focus searching and precision fire. There's a bit of potential there, we just need to go a few steps beyond.
In Other M, when you switch into first person mode, you can't strafe. Now, in real life, taking aim with weapons tends to require a lot of focus, and so staying still means better accuracy. I get what they were trying to convey, but this is an action game with aliens blowing up. I think we can forgive a bit of movement from Samus. Worse yet is the turning in first-person mode, in which Samus suddenly decides to pretend that her power suit is a rusty tank. It really feels like Team Ninja put most of their efforts into the third-person mode. It was faster-paced, and the controls felt a lot tighter and more responsive. The first-person mode probably could have benefited from some walking, but walking that was slow and steady enough to keep the illusion of Samus having to concentrate. On top of that, being able to move and increasing her turning speed would have made the action scenes where you need to be in first-person mode feel a lot freer and allow Other M to be an action game. I think the flow between combat styles is an interesting idea, and having a system where you can switch on the fly when needed while still retaining ease of play could have made this a really influential style of perspective-based action. Plus, as good as it was, you can't expect every Metroid game to be exactly like Metroid Prime.
But that's not the only point. Its viewing mode also worked well in the environmental storytelling, and this could have been only done in a first-person mode. Other M surprisingly took a step backwards from the scan visor by restricting your movement in first person. The search segments were an interesting concept, but kind of annoying for 2 reasons. First being you had to wait several seconds after you hovered your cursor over your target, making you doubt you found the thing you were supposed to be looking for. Second being, who the heck stands still when searching for something? Third being, you usually had no idea what the f you were looking for. We could have Other M's first person mode be similar to the scan visor from Metroid Prime, but also have the ability ability to fire your beams and missiles more precisely. This combination of slow and steady precision and high-speed flashy action could definitely make for some creative boss fights and mind-bending puzzles. We could have easily had a great, well, better hybrid game here, one part fast-paced action-y third-person platformer and one part first-person adventure, a sort of hybrid of Strider and Metroid Prime. Tell me that doesn't sound awesome!
Number 3. Samus. You are authorized to make a better game. The authorization mechanic, wherein your power-ups are only allowed to be used when stated by Adam, has never been a well-liked feature of Other M, and I stand by it being really ill-conceived. Pretty much every other game in the Metroid series, with the possible exception of Fusion, had Samus begin the game with few or none of her abilities from the previous game chronologically. The sudden rationalization for Samus having access to pretty much all of her abilities and then suddenly not comes right out of nowhere. This was probably introduced to bridge the gap between story and gameplay, though you don't need to explain absolutely everything for your world to be credible. I can suspend my disbelief and say, hey, maybe Samus doesn't have any of her abilities at the start of each game because, I don't know, maybe the alterations to her suit are temporary or something.
Besides, this is fundamentally a game about beating the crap out of aliens. I think Other M would have benefited from not having the authorization mechanic, period. In the other Metroid games, I was too preoccupied with how great the experience was to care about why I didn't have much equipment at the start. It's like asking where all the dead Marios go after he loses a life. No one's gonna give a crap unless Game Theory makes an entertaining video about it.
Also, for how deathly serious the game's story and writing take themselves, the authorization mechanic actually creates more holes in logic than it plugs. The most infamous example is when Samus enters the Pyrosphere, where exposure to the heat causes damage until she can activate her Various suit. Now, while I understand that this was done to illustrate the whole hot things hurt you mechanic, that doesn't excuse how Adam only decides to let Samus use this thing that can protect her from the hot temperatures of the Pyrosphere when a giant creature attacks. Because hey, it's not like Samus was, dying of heat stroke or anything like that before then. Actually, even heat stroke would be getting heat stroke from that kind of temperature. Convection? What the hell is that?
Anyways, let's say Adam gives you the Various suit before you enter the Pyrosphere instead. That way, you're able to access the level when you're officially required for the mission, and if you decide to go before that, you get burned. If you want to show that the hot atmosphere would hurt, that could potentially be a way of incorporating without this crap. However, with that said, why does Adam not just let Samus have the Various suit activated from the get-go? I mean, sure, he might not want her to enter a specific area at a certain time, yeah, but it's not like it's gonna damage Federation equipment like the power bombs would. What, does the Various suit have a magnetic field that'll disrupt vital technology? Give me a break.
Either way you look at it, the authorization mechanic really has no purpose to exist aside from forcing the whole Adam-Samus-Semi-Yuki relationship. Or heck, if that didn't exist, the Pyrosphere bit we just spent a good minute complaining about would be a lot more justified. With Adam not being in charge of your power-ups, let's say that you find the Various suit upgrade instead, and then you suddenly get attacked by the boss like normal, allowing you to test out your newfound power. Sure, you're still gonna get hurt by the atmosphere before that, but it at least has less of a gross undercurrent to it. Bringing us to...
The character.
Now, Samus. In previous games, there wasn't much need for her to talk as she was in an isolated atmosphere and the environments and logbook provided all of the exposition. However, when there was a chance for her to speak, it was shown that Samus was soft-spoken, duty-bound, and very introspective, but she shows a strong compassionate side when sentient lives are on the line. The characterization was consistent throughout the series, even in games where Samus is considered a silent protagonist. You can see this side of her in her reactions to the Federation landing site in Prime 2 and the deaths of the Hunters in Prime 3, along with her viciously trying to blow Meta Ridley's head off at one point. However, everything changed when the Team Ninja attacked. Every trait that Samus had was exaggerated to the point of unintentional hilarity or annoyance. This Samus will not stop talking. You hear every insipid thought that goes through her head. Every single time Samus interacts with someone or something, we're forced into a monotone soliloquy explaining how significant the interaction was. I swear, if Samus had no internal dialogue, the story would have been a lot more tolerable. I mean, look at that intro cutscene. If there was no dialogue in that, that would have been great. At the very least, we could have had skippable cutscenes. I thought we were done with this crap after Kingdom Hearts.
Open the door. Lead me into everlasting darkness.
You okay, Josh?
It was a dark time for me. No pun intended.
And let's talk about her relationship with Adam. On its own, there's nothing technically wrong with Samus being in a position of subservience. She's fully capable of asserting herself, and there's good enough gender diversity in the Metroid series to guess that there are probably female officers, possibly even COs like Adam. So we don't take too much issue with their gender dynamic. But with that said, Samus and Adam's relationship is handled poorly here. For starters, let's look at Adam himself. The first trailer for Other M had him speak his iconic catchphrase, "Any objections, lady," in essentially the more understanding yet firm tone that I expected from his descriptions in Metroid Fusion.
Any objections, lady?
In the final game, the take they selected of this line sounds a lot more dismissive.
Any objections, lady?
I think it's the same voice actor in both clips, and so I'm curious as to why the producers selected the latter direction for the final game. Don't get me wrong, Adam had his moments where he was a jerk to Samus in Fusion, but combine his voice direction in Other M with some things he does that come across as unintentionally horrible even without the bad localization, and you get a character that really does not mesh well with Samus.
Adam comes across as a complete a-hole, and it looks like Samus just rolls over and takes his unnecessary harshness because why? I think what they were going for is Samus feels guilty about the way she treated Adam and wants to make amends in any way possible, yet Adam still feels resentment about her actions. That's good. In fact, that's a great idea. But sadly, it was swallowed up by Samus's monotone angst. Samus didn't really give us anything to chew on or analyze about her relationship with Adam other than her regret or how young and naive she was, if that wasn't made clear enough. Here's an example conversation I would have thrown in somewhere. I don't get it, Samus. Why are you still taking orders from him?
It's complicated.
Try me.
I respect him.
This conversation doesn't give the audience the full explanation, but it gives the player a good incentive to explore Samus's motivations. Maybe she wants to get on his good side after ditching him. Maybe she still sees him as a respectable authority figure. Maybe she sees him as more knowledgeable on the situation at hand and believes he knows how to handle it best. Maybe it's several of these things. Maybe it's none of them. Who knows? We don't have to outright say any of these things because a good story can leave that to the audience to interpret. A good story makes an audience think. A good story fosters intelligent discussion. A good story makes you come back to it. A good story doesn't spoon feed you the significance of every single friggin' interaction like we're idiots!
Number 5. The story. Let's start by talking about the motherhood symbolism in this game. And by motherhood and symbolism, I mean the baby! The baby! The baby! Babies cry! Bottle shit! Metroid Other M is an acronym for mom! Other M is an anagram for mother! It's an anagram inside an acronym! What the hell is this shit? Point is, the story of Other M is bad. It's probably the least subtle piece of fiction I've ever seen. It hammers in everything, and I mean it hammers it in! It hammers it in more than Pink Floyd the Wall and its goose-stepping hammers! The dialogue itself, with ramblings such as the baby, or the deleter, or the words he so obviously chose, outsider, reeks of a poor translation from the original Japanese context to English. I don't know if the developers intended for the game to come across this way or not, but for all of the badass action bits and moments like this, there are a lot of points where Samus suddenly gets victimized in situations that take huge leaps in logic for rule of drama!
We already mentioned the bit where Samus is pointlessly roasted alive because Adam didn't authorize her to protect herself from 4-digit temperatures, but then there's the game's most remembered scene, the Ridley encounter. Oh look, this is like, what, the 5th time Samus has fought Ridley? 3rd or 4th if you don't count the Prime games? And now is the time she decides to magically transform into a little girl and pee her pants in fear? Okay, I understand this might be her experiencing an episode of post-traumatic stress disorder, and that perhaps the scary environment, the weight of seeing a creature die for her, and encountering someone with whom she's had a strained relationship might finally have crashed down on her with the appearance of the thing that killed her parents. So then why am I so focused on how moronic and out of place the scene is? One way the scene could have possibly been more justified is through better build-up. If the game wants to say she had a PTSD relapse, that's fine. Just don't pull it out of nowhere. I'd recommend throwing in some actually relevant flashbacks or nightmares showing that Ridley still features in her thoughts to some degree. Or maybe she has a few adverse reactions to offhand mentions of Ridley. But no, out of nowhere, we had to paralyze her completely, giving us an excuse to pretend kill off the token black guy.
I think I gotta teach you a lesson about subtlety.
Oh, f*** you, game.
I think the scene I take the most issue with is near the end of the game, where Adam shoots Samus in the back in an attempt to depower her. This came across to me as a horrible, overblown, suffering-built character moment, and also one where the game is clearly more focused on portraying militaristic protocols correctly, over truly making Samus's character feel organic. She's shot in the back as if Adam knew she would force him aside and get herself killed, like she nearly did when Adam's brother Ian died years earlier. Adam believed she would ultimately doom the universe if she got herself killed, as he's not nearly as able to stop MB as Samus is. It develops Adam's character, but at the complete expense of Samus's, making her feel like less the strong, consistent character she was in the series up to this point, and more like a pawn to advance the plot. Move Samus to drama flashback C, set up for sappy climax B. Take out second Rook. Part of why I love the previous Metroid games so much is because of how Samus had her own agency as a character, be it through roaming giant free worlds or in her own actions in the plot. Other M drastically needed more of this agency. Just as the game itself is super linear, Samus in the story is constantly pushed around.
Oh, and then there's Baby Ridley. No.
You know, when you're that unthreatening in Other M, maybe Ridley should be playable in Smash Bros. The image of Ridley comedically slamming into the screen suddenly works when you imagine he used to be a Moogle.
I have no idea where in the development phase things went wrong. Everything looked promising from the start. Team Ninja points the finger at Nintendo, Nintendo points the finger at Team Ninja. We don't know. Maybe they were both crazy. Like Sonic 06, this game did have a lot of great ideas. It should have gone a little further with the gameplay and pulled way the heck back with the story, and been better translated, and had less of the baby. And less of the baby.
And that about wraps it up for this rant. I'm the Autarch.
I'm the Fiery Joker, and
see you next mission.
God.